Hey, Mubs, welcome to
Thanks
the
for having me
show.
on. Excited to talk about BitClout.
Yeah, super excited to have you. I want to start off with just because I looked at your profile or your website, and you have built a lot of projects, and that is so cool. It's like you're like a proper hacker, and so I want to first start off with like, how did you get into it? What excited you the
About
most?
BitClout specifically, or just about hacking in general?
No,
BitClout,
about
yeah,
BitCloud. I feel
yeah,
like you are a hacker. I can already see that. You just like to build stuff, so I get that how where that come
yeah.
from.
I
But I'm just
mean, I
curious
think with
about
BitClout,
BitCloud.
I think I've always been excited about social media in general. I signed up for Twitter in 2009, 2010. I signed up for Facebook as soon as it was able to. I wasn't in a college over here and stuff, so it took a while before I could get into Facebook. I signed up for Instagram, sort of early on as well. So I've always been into social media a lot, and then, but also, after you use it for a while, you kind of learn that it has good ideals, but because it's owned by a corporation, corporations have their own agenda, and so all sorts of things like that. And so I've been looking around at like more open platforms and more distributed platforms, and I looked at things like Mastodon and sort of those kind of things, and they were interesting, but they never really got me excited about the sort of future potential that they had. And then when I found out about BitClout, and I think the thing that kind of really intrigued me about BitClout was that it has a mechanism to pay for itself. And that mechanism also gives you the ability to do a few other things. Obviously, in terms of like buying the coin. So they merged the idea of a blockchain, a social token, and social media all in one, and also built this whole kind of stock market idea into it as well. So it just kind of packed in a whole bunch of ideas that were all kind of exciting on their own, but when you marry them all together into one platform, that really, really just like takes things up to the next level. But the fact that it's all open as well is also something that was really kind of intriguing as well.
Got it. And so you found out about it, and then you just started to like just kind of play with it. And then is that when you like, okay, I'm just gonna like just because I like to hack, I'm gonna build something just for fun and see
Yeah,
what
so
happens,
I
kind of thing.
signed up, and the first thing I'm trying to do is like, well, okay, I mean, I like the website, I like the platform, but I want to understand how it works. I want to understand the mechanics of it. And so the way I
Hmm.
do that is to create something on it, just so I understand how
Yep.
the API works and how the API talks to the node and what's information to the node. Understanding the technical way that the architecture works and how all the pieces fit together is sort of. And so yeah, I decided to build things because that's I could go and read all the white papers and try and read code, and I'm like, well, that's not how I learn. So the way I learn is to
Hmm.
take things apart and then put them back together again, hopefully. And then so in the sort of software world, that's really easy, right? You just sit down and you start to write code, you start to hit APIs and see what information you get, and then you kind of build something that hopefully works at the end of that.
That makes sense. And so, what was the first project that you
Yeah, so
started
I
with?
mean, yeah, so although I wasn't like, super early, I was still super early. And so like at that point, we didn't really have a lot of access. They just put the API and everything behind Cloudflare, which made it really hard to access, sort of APIs and things. So the first project I built was BitClout Follow, which was something that you could almost build
Hmm.
without it being on the chain. It didn't actually need a lot of information off of the actual blockchain and APIs and kind of things like that. I did build it using the API originally, and then they put it behind Cloudflare, so I couldn't really use it the way that I wanted to. But yeah, so that was the first thing I built, just as a way to understand how things work inside of BitClout in terms of holding coins and not holding coins, and who's following who, and ultimately to solve a problem that I think exists now and will exist in the future as well, because understanding who's on the platform, the kind of things that they want to talk about, so that you can follow
Yep.
the right kind of people. Because social media at the end of the day
Yep.
is, if you're following the right people, it's an awesome thing. If you're following the wrong people, it's a horrible thing. And so
Yep.
big clout follow was something I was hoping to solve, that to help people find the right people to follow.
Makes sense. And I mean, you're right. You're right. When you go on Twitter or like when you sign up for a new account, they try to get you. I think it's in Facebook as well. There's a thing. I think I listened to Josh Ellman. from Greylock. I think he talked about this where back in the day with Twitter, they used to do like we our magic moment is to get this many
Yep.
followers in this many days, right? And once that happens, the user is likely to stick for X percentage, right? And so makes sense. And right now, when you go on there, you're like even like you might not resonate with these people, especially as a
Right.
mainstream user, right? And I like when I see your website or your platform with I kind of see what you mean. It's like you can go and you can select like one group of people, and that could it could be that this is all the content. In example, if you're in tech, you can select the top 110 tech people or top 10 tech people or whatever it might be, and this might be the first few things that you see, and then from there you can kind of change and play with it as you kind of
Yeah,
go.
I mean, ultimately, obviously, people will talk about whatever they want to talk about, but
Yeah,
at least you get the idea of what their interests are, and even if they talk about other things, they typically still have a spin of where they look at it with that kind of view, with that kind of interest as well. And so yeah, so finding kind of like the right kind of people, I think, is hugely important in social media, and hugely important, like you said, with the sort of onboarding. Like if you can find 5 or 10 people that you follow, and that will probably follow you back as well. And you kind of build that little,
yeah,
sort of community that you can talk to and who will talk back to you. I think is the thing that will make people stick on the sort of
makes
platform
some
as well.
makes total sense. So how did that evolve from starting with that, and now you've done like a bunch of different projects, and I'm sure you played a lot with it. Actually, I want to first know like how did that evolve, and then I want to know what is your thought process now. Now that you
Right.
have played with it, what's behind this? How you think about the
Yeah,
technical
so
aspect
in
of it?
terms of the other projects, it was mostly just like I saw like a pain that like I'm obviously an active user of BitClout itself. So every time I'm logged in, every time I'm trying to do something, every time I'm using something, like God, this is painful. I need to. And so my first instinct is like, how do I make it not painful? How do I solve that problem? So like Clout email, for example, was just something that I was tired of people telling me I sent you a message, but you haven't responded. Well, I didn't know I had a message, and
Yep.
so I built something that
Yeah.
sends me
Yep.
an email now whenever somebody sends me a message. So I know that there's no so I know when somebody has sent me a message, and so yeah, so it's just a matter of like fixing some pain that I see, even if it's a temporary thing, right? Because I know ultimately somebody's going to fix like the sort of notification and the messaging, and whether it's in an app or whether somebody's going to build it into the core or whatever, it's going to get solved. But it's going to be a while because other people
Mhm.
have more important things to do right now, right? Like they're focusing on onboarding and exchanges and big platform wide things. Even though they updated the way that messaging works, once you into the messaging, still knowing that you have a message is still really hard. And so Cloud Email is
Yep.
still a function. I still get emails every day from Cloud Email telling me that I've got a message, and I was like, I didn't know I had a message, and so it's still working. But no, I mean it's gotten easier, right? Like they've released the code to everything. We got access to the nodes, we got access to the identity, we got access to the front end, we got access to the back end. We can run our own nodes. We can do mining now, so we can actually read the code itself without having to like decompile things and try and figure out how stuff works. We just look at the actual code itself. It's still, I mean, even with me, like I've been a kind of a big web person, right? Like I built a lot of websites, web applications.
Mhm.
So seeing an application like the code for the node itself, which is like massive real time Go application, which tries to process thousands of transactions that kind of arrives. It's completely new to to me as well. Like I haven't really got into that side of the world yet. But also, I don't feel like you have to. I mean, like you can obviously use it without having to do any of that kind of stuff. Even as me, somebody building on top of the platform, I don't really need to understand how it all works to kind of build on top of
Right.
it, just in terms of the APIs that are out there and kind of things like that. So it's been fun to kind of try and understand what's happening, and it always makes it easier to build the application if you have a sense of how things work. But you don't need to know all the little ins and outs of it, and to be able to make some pretty cool stuff, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, so how what do you think about the tech like as you have built different projects now, what where do you how do you think how technically sound is the
I
Is the
mean,
platform?
it seems pretty. I mean, it sounds like they didn't start from scratch, right? This is a fork of an existing Bitcoin server essentially, and they basically started with something that had existed already and then they forked that code base and decided to add the functionality that they needed specifically to BitClout on top of that.
Uh,
Which obviously makes
Interesting.
it easier because you've got years worth of history of other people building a core platform, and so you've got a solid foundation to kind of start from already is there. So that seems pretty cool. I mean, I love that. I mean, that's how they're able to ship a lot of stuff so fast as well. Is that it's using a platform that
Oh,
exists, and so there's other integrations and things that kind of exist. I'm sure with the stuff with the buying the BitClout stuff, buying BitClout straight in the platform now is probably a project that somebody existed somewhere else as well, or they integrated with Wire on some other platform already, and so they just kind of use that same understanding, that same learning to say, okay, how do we build that into BitClout, right? So the fact that they're doing a lot of the stuff with technology that kind of exists out there already, and not like, okay, we need to code everything from scratch ourselves, is kind of how they're able to launch stuff so fast and so quickly, which I think is the right way to do it. What BitClout isn't really anything new, right? Like it's a social media platform that's existed for years. It's a social token which has existed for years. Like, so it's not really new technology. It's not something new that they're creating. The way that it's all plugged together, this kind of reminds me a lot of kind of Apple, right? Like MP3 players existed for a really long time and things like that, and and then phones and mobile phones existed for a really long time as well. But they took all of the tech, they took all of the bits that people really liked and the bits that people used a lot, and put them into a really easy to use package. And really, and everybody loves Apple, and I think BitCloud's doing the same thing, right? Like they're kind of taking all these things that exist out there, but they're really hard to use and they don't work well together right now. But BitClout's taking all of these technologies and saying, look, we can put them together in a way that's easy to use, that's understandable, and is gonna make people happy to be on the platform itself. You can track back to the code, so you know that where all of the code originated from and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like they're hiding it or anything like that. I
mm,
mean, it's all there.
right.
And so yeah, so it didn't really take a lot of sleuthing or anything like that. It's just I mean, obviously, not a lot of people on the platform are even going to go look at the code for the node and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and it's just something like I said, it's
Yeah.
not something I really fully understand in terms of reading all the code because I don't understand all the specifics, all the languages and stuff. But when you're reading all the history of where the code came from and kind of who's making the updates to the code and all that kind of stuff, you can look back and kind of see all of that stuff as well.
And you saw that it was like it looks like it's like the fork
Yeah,
of
well,
Bitcoin
yeah.
basically.
So somebody built. Let me see if I can find it. That way, I can give you the specifics. But um, so there was somebody had written a Bitcoin node in Go. And so when BitClout decided they wanted to build something, they basically said, okay, well, somebody's already built a node in Go for Bitcoin, and so we're just going to use that as a starting point, and we're going to fork that. And let me see if I can find the repo where it mentions that. Um, and it's I don't know why it made it a link there, but yes, if you go to the very end of that page, you'll see at the very bottom, it actually says that the architecture for BitClout was heavily inspired by Bitcoin. We owe a debt of gratitude to the developers of BTCD for producing a truly amazing Go Bitcoin client that served as reference for building BitClout. So whether they
Wow.
use the code or just kind of used it as here's an example of some working code, and then they just pulled out the bits they needed, or whether they started with the actual architecture that existed there already. I mean, so like I said, it's not like they were hiding it. It was right there for kind of people to kind of read. And if you look through the code, it's written in Go and everything like that. So I believe it's very similar code base.
Huh, that's so cool. That's actually very cool. I'm gonna share this with the audience. This is amazing. I didn't know that. That's actually so cool to learn about that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, I was not expecting that. It's
Yeah, I
so
mean, like I said, I
interesting.
mean, I mean, obviously, I don't know
Uh,
how long they've been working on this idea. I mean, obviously, we know when they launched it, but it didn't sound like they've been doing it actively for kind of very long.
yeah.
And so the only way, and
Yep.
this is obviously the sort of lovely thing, the beautiful thing about open source code is if you want to build something that kind of exists already, but has a lot of the features that you want, but you want to add it, you want to take it in a slightly different direction. Open source lets you do that a lot because you get access to not just the code, but the idea behind the code in terms of what's this code supposed to do, how far is it supposed to take you, and then once you get to that point, it's up to you now. Okay, now where do we take it next? What do we do with it to kind of put our own spin on it and stuff like that? So so that's why I think open source is awesome, and it's obviously helped BitClout a lot in terms of being able to kind of put out new features and new functionality amazingly
So
fast as
fast.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Talking about open source, so I was reading your profile. You're launching a new product
Yeah.
called CloutPayWall, which is supposed to be
Yes.
open source. And I want to kind of know more about it because, like, one thing which was very interesting was I was reading. I'm going to read this from your profile. You said this is not a typical project. It will be open source. I wanted to experiment with raising funds for open source project by allowing speculation in the coin. Since this is an experiment project, I may raise the founder reward. I may lower it to see what works best. So why did you wanted to move away from uh, like because you build a few projects just to
Right.
test the waters. Obviously, you were playing with it, you were seeing, and now what made you wanted to make this one open source? Is it just another test to see how that?
Yeah, so I mean, so I was trying to kill kind of two birds with one stone here. So one was like you said. I mean, a lot of my projects are just that. They're kind of fun projects. They're kind of everything I've done is kind of a side project because I'm doing I've got a
Yeah,
full time job. I write code for a living. So so I've kind of got that kind of squared away. And so I think there's kind of two things that people are having a hard time understanding right now. Is one is like, okay, if you want to build something on BitClout, what's the right approach to take? What's an approach to take, right? So people are sharing little snippets of code, and that so people are trying to be helpful in terms of explaining how things work, but I still think it's still kind of hard for people to get started in terms of like writing full applications and understanding all the different bits and pieces that are kind of involved with that. In terms of there's the identity, there's the API, there's the node, there's the front end, the back end. There's all sorts of different bits and pieces, and you have to like interface with different parts of it to get the bits that you need when you're doing the bit that you're kind of working on. And so my idea for doing this as kind of an open source project was, look, there's probably like 5 or 6 projects already out there that are trying to build a way for you to like give rewards to your coin holders in terms of like show them this post if somebody logging in has owned $100 of my coin, or they own the whole one of my creator coin, sort of that kind of thing. So I didn't want to build another one of those applications because there's like I said, there's kind of already a few people out there who are kind of working on that stuff. But I thought that would make a good application to kind of build to show people how you would build an application on top of the platform. So not necessarily building a tool like that, but more to build a tool to show you how you would build a tool like that. Because I think that core functionality is something that will need to exist inside of other applications in the future. Right, like it does. Let's say you want to build something that leverages BitClout in terms of the social tokens, and so there's lots of functionality I think that people are going to build on top of BitClout that you're going to need to like control access to your application based on who somebody is on BitClout, based on the things that they do on BitClout, based on the things that they own on BitClout. Not necessarily that isn't the core of the application, but just understanding that functionality of who owns what and who's logging in, and so understanding all of that kind of stuff so that you can build the application you actually want to build. I thought that would be a cool thing to open source to build so that people could understand how all the different bits in the BitClout ecosystem work together so that you can do all of those things as well. And so, yeah, so I was like, well, I don't want to build it as an application because it's not really an application. So if I build it as an open source, it's more of an like example of how an application would work, but you open source the code so people can actually read the code and understand how it all works, and you can see how it all works. And then if I open source that, and I was like, well, okay, if I'm going to build it as open source, wouldn't it be cool if people could actually pay for the source code, even though it's open source? Let's say they want early access, or they want me to add a specific feature that's not a part of the roadmap. Maybe they can buy some coin and say, Mubs, can you build this? Or will you build this if I buy a certain amount of the coin? Sort of that kind of stuff as well. So I was experimenting with how could you build an open source ecosystem on top of people owning your coin.
Hmm. How does so what does a use case of that look like? Like what does it look like in as an example would be like so who would you think like who would be a user of that? Like what kind of dev? What do you think they
Yeah,
can create on
so I
top?
mean, like I
Like
said,
what would
it's
be an
really
example?
anybody who's building web applications, and but they want to leverage, let's say, understanding. So actually, just to give you an example, so we're building club rooms. I think you might have spoken to did
Yeah,
Daniel
yeah,
about club
yeah.
rooms. So in club rooms, the idea is that you build like a Zoom kind of environment. So anybody can spin up a room, and then you can control who is allowed into your room based on how much, how many coins they own, or if they're a top 10 holder of your coin, sort of that kind of stuff. So that's purely a web application, right? Like there's a separate website. It's called Club Rooms, and we're going to use some streaming APIs to be able to actually start the rooms and sort of allow people to join the rooms. But to back that up, though, you still need to know who is logging in from BitClout, what coins they own, all sorts of things like that, right? So the Clout Paywall stuff that I wrote as kind of like an open source implementation was I basically, that's gonna the core of the code that I built for Clout Paywall is gonna leverage, we're gonna leverage that code in club rooms to control, so just help with that authentication layer essentially. But we're still going to build a whole stack of
No,
functionality on top, which is specifically about the rooms
yep.
and chatting inside of rooms and being able to tip people inside of rooms. That's all extra functionality we're going to build, which is just like it's a separate web application. It's separate from BitClout. It doesn't run on BitClout other than knowing who's logged in and who you are on BitClout. So anybody who needs to build a web application that needs to know who you are on BitClout and the things that you do and own on BitClout is, CloutPayWall will be helpful for you to understand how the mechanisms work in terms of knowing who's logged in and knowing who they are and knowing what they do on BitClout and knowing what kind of things they own on BitClout. Now it's not going to be something that you can just use to kind of it's not something that you would just take and plug into your application. You could potentially, but just like I said, it's more of kind of a learning tool so that you can understand, okay, if I need to get this information, I can look here. And this is the API
Mm.
endpoint I use to get this information. I can just go look at the code for Cloud Paywall to see how Mubs kind of extracted that information out without me having to go through, read the code for the node and the code for the API and see what's there. I can just look at this working example of an application and kind of see how Hubs handle that instead.
Mubs, what are you doing, man? We got to partner up. I got my product, Cloud Passport, out there. Does the exact same thing. What are we doing here?
well,
We got to collaborate.
well, like I said, that's why I said there's a few there's obviously lots of people doing this, but lots of people need to do this in terms of just sort of
I
integrating
agree.
that into their own applications as well. Like for some things, it is the application, right? In terms of like even with things
Yeah.
like subcloud where you can access like the newsletter based on who owns you. There's so many different ways that you can use the information, but people were just I struggled with trying to figure it all out, and I was like, well, I know other people are going to
Yep.
struggle with this as well. So I was like, well, why don't I struggle with it, and then I can open source it so that less people have to struggle with it kind of in the future as well. Because ultimately for me, the more people know how this works, the more people are able to build on this, the more people that are able to build useful tools on top of BitClout, the larger chance of the BitClout succeeding and taking on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all those
Yep.
is, it's going to make everybody who's on board now super happy.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. Honestly, like the way I think about it is very similar to you. Like right now, the tools that I've built or like we're building, we're not. This is not like be all end all, right? We're just having fun with it, right? We're like it's so early right now that if it does go big, if that happens, there will be so much opportunity to build stuff. Like it'd be insane. And so, same as you, like the idea right now with us has been we're building different tools just to test the water, see what people like, people don't like, and as we see, and meet people and and build the community. And once we have that, and once we see, okay, well, right now it's more been like one-off tools, but eventually be like, okay, we want to build something big, and that's kind of the idea. But for now, we're just like building and testing and learning, and kind of what you said. But out of curiosity, random question, and I don't think we chatted about this, but did you ever had a chance to play with our Cloud
Yeah, I
Passport tool?
don't think I did as of sort of at the time, because I mean, it was just one of those weird things where it's like the APIs and things were changing so quickly, and things were coming out so quickly as well. There's only so many things to look at, kind of at about the time, and then eventually I figured it out for myself, which is like the whole idea behind Cloud Paywall, just because I wanted to be able to integrate it easily into my own applications, kind of essentially. And so that's kind of what I was kind of really kind of
Yeah,
aimed at with even with this cloud
yeah,
paywall. It's like I said, it's more exposing the code so people can take the sort of understandings of that so that you can kind of
yeah.
integrate
No,
it sort of
I get that.
into their own applications.
Yeah, because our when we because we launched it like last week or earlier last week, yeah. So our goal was the same as yours. Like we were like when we were building, it was like my business partner, he was building, and he was like, man, like even to implement BitClout identity, he's like, this is a fucking pain. He's like, I gotta go find all this, and it's like he's like, as a developer, he's like, I don't want to spend all this time. Like, why don't we just build something simple which people can take without like without like going out and doing all that
Right,
manual work themselves. And that's kind of how the idea came along. But we never thought from a mindset of
right,
teaching people, right? Which I think is pretty cool, by the way. I think it's cool that because developers, I think they need to like learn, and they need to understand how, as you said, like, because that will lead to more creativity. I totally get that. Like our idea was kind of going after like projects or creators who who have like let's say paywall content, and they just want to put it out, but they don't want to go through the hassle
right,
of figuring it out. They're like, I just want, like, you know what I mean, like a simple sign up, like like if you think about it, like simple, like I want to sign up, let people sign up at Facebook so I have their information. I don't want to go through the hassle of all that stuff. Like, that was kind of our mindset. And so yeah, that's kind of how we thought about it. But again, it's been more that thing when like when we get different projects, like as we're talking to a couple of other projects right now who are testing the tool, our goal is to just learn from these projects what do they
right.
want next. What's the biggest, how can we help, like make the community bigger, because as you said, as the community grows, everybody at the
Yep.
ground floor grows. As simple as that. Like, and so yeah, I look at, like, sense when people are building similar tool, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, you know what I mean, like, and like even yesterday, when I was talking to Daniel was talking about Cloud later. I'm like, yeah, because we were generally so pissed off because I have, like, a couple of employees who work for me, and I have to post all the stuff with the clips every day myself because of the seed phase, can't give that away. And I was just so excited for Cloud later. I was like, we were gonna build our own Cloud later because we were like, we need this. And then Daniel was built. I'm like, Daniel, just get me on it, man. Give it to me. I need this right now. But it's so cool that it's
Yeah,
like
and I think ultimately,
yeah,
if you look at it too, like even if you look at like the Twitter and the Facebook ecosystem, right? Like there's the same issues there, right? Like you don't have one tool to kind of schedule your social media posts, right? There's like 20 tools out there, already, and
yeah.
I think and well, actually, there's probably hundreds out there in terms of Twitter and Facebook and all
Yeah.
those platforms.
20 that
Right.
are 20 that are
There's
known.
probably
Yeah.
hundreds out there. And I
Yeah.
think, ultimately, obviously people are still working out how big cloud works. And obviously they've changed, the platforms isn't quite the same. So it's not all centralized and stuff. So how things work isn't going to be quite the same. But there will be 10 or 20, even by the end of the year, there'll be 10 or 20 different tools that do the same kind of thing. And, and ultimately there'll be one or two that kind of lead and kind of sort of own the majority of the market. But I think right now we need three or four, people trying to do the same thing so that we can figure out what the right way is.
Hmm.
Because if we have just one person implementing
Yeah.
things right now, that's not enough. We need people experimenting and trying and
Agreed.
seeing what works, because now's the time to do all of that kind of experimenting.
Agreed. And yeah, failing and iterating and learning, and that's it's all needed right now. And I think that, and even like I love, and I want to talk to you about this, by the way, because I love the idea of like what you guys are doing with club rooms. You guys are collaborating, bunch of different people, smart people coming together and building. What's crazy, by the way, I was listening to a podcast yesterday with DAOs, decentralized
Oh yeah. Yep.
autonomous organizations, uh, and I was listening about it, and it's just as I was listening, I remember talking to Danny because I had a podcast like an hour before I was listening to that podcast, and I was like, man, this is interesting because it's like a bunch of different people who kind of know each other from different parts of the world. They're coming together. This makes total sense. It's like building a
Yeah.
corporation with, you know what I mean, without like this. And I thought it was very interesting. And yeah, I love that. Like, you guys are collaborating. So how is that going? How is that collaboration with everybody's a bunch of smart people building cool shit coming together?
Yeah,
How's that kind of working out?
like this, like I said, this isn't the first time that I've kind of handled this already. Because so the first time I met Daniel was probably, I don't know if it's 10 years back, 8 years back. It's been a while, and I helped Daniel launch his current company Q, and we did it the same kind of way. We had Daniel, Matt, and I in different parts of the world. We kind of had our own kind of specialty, our own expertise. We kind of worked on that to kind of bring that together and kind of launch Q, which is kind of, it's a social media platform as well, or it's a social media tool rather than an actual platform. And so, back then it was a little bit harder. The sort of tools and things that you have to kind of work with kind of weren't the same. But now, with things like Discord and Slack and sort of those kind of things that make this online collaboration much easier. I don't even think we used a video chat back then because video online was really hard back then. Now everybody's has it, and we're obviously building club rooms as well, which is all about video as well now. And so yeah, so it's remarkable, how it's gotten easier and easier to kind of to kind of do these things. But it's also interesting to see that people seem to be more up for it now as well, right? Like I think even in the past there was this sort of apprehension with like, I don't know you, I've never met you, I don't know where you are, I don't know where you live, I've never seen you in person, I can't possibly work with you. And now it just seems to be everybody just hops into a Discord channel, and everybody seems to be interested in kind of working with other people and kind of experimenting with things. I think
Yeah.
that mindset shift is the really interesting thing, because I think, when we started Q, it was very hard to get people on board in terms of, well, you guys are building this thing, you guys have never met. One person's in New York, there's sort of two other people in the separate parts in England. You guys have never met, but you're going to start a company, you're going to start a project. Like, what the heck's up with that? And now it's like, well, this is the
Yeah.
norm now. It's like, this is how people operate now. And so I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, agreed. So what are we building together, Mubs? What's our
Well,
next
let me
project
get
here?
CloutPayWall done, because like I've got to put that out first. But as soon as that's done, I'm always interested in kind of new things and new projects as well. So
I love that.
I've spent the long weekend basically downloading the blockchain so that I can do interesting things with the blockchain. So that's going to be my next thing. I think is just trying to figure out. Okay, now that I've got all this information, everything that's happened on the blockchain itself, what can I do with it?
I love it. I went to because I went through YC, and you have the perfect YC avatar or persona, like, just hack shit and just like break shit and just build shit and like, make something people want. I love that. It's like just like that. Like, I'm just gonna keep on building
I,
cool shit just for fun.
yeah,
Like
I,
perfect
I
Paul
think that's also
Graham.
the
Yeah.
interesting thing with the
So
BitClout too, right? It was like when I was doing this on Twitter and those other platforms, it was great too. Like, people started following me and stuff like that. But now on BitClout, I'm doing it, and I'm sharing what I'm learning, and I'm showing people what I built and kind of how I built it and stuff. And people are still, I think I'm up to 1,800 followers now on BitClout. But people are buying my coin
nice.
as well, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I don't actually have to sell people stuff. Like, I don't have to get them to sign up for my email list and email them once a week and all that kind of. People just are following me, and they're kind of liking what I'm doing. They're liking what I'm making. They're liking what I'm sharing, they're buying my coin, and so I'm kind of making money. I'm not earning any income yet because I can't off ramp. There's still no off ramp. But the idea that people are actually like buying your coin because they like what you're sharing and they like what you're doing is this is also what's
Yep.
kind of exciting about BitClout. Now I don't have to worry about how do I monetize what I'm doing. I can just do what I'm doing, and people are just are showing me that what I'm doing is valuable without me having to do anything else.
Yep. I love that. Yeah. I want to. I finish this off with a couple of technical questions, but before that, I actually want to ask you this: Do you? What are some of the other ideas you're really excited about, or something you want to work on
No,
in the
so I mean,
future?
so yeah, so right now I think we're still in that kind of pain solving phase. I wish I could solve notifications. That was part of the reason for me trying to download the entire chain because I figured it would be kind of a cool thing just to look at every transaction as it came through and see if you could somehow turn that into a notification platform. Because I think that to me is still something that's kind of not solved. I'm excited for the
Hmm.
clouded launch as well. I think to be able to
Yep.
search content and search for hashtags within the actual content that people are sharing and stuff, I think is really interesting as well. So I think that's really cool as well. And I think longer term, I mean, I think something that I've said I want to focus on and I will focus on is building more insights for people who are just creating stuff on the platform, right? Like, because I think right now there's a very heavy focus on creator coins and understanding who's undervalued and which coins I can buy so I can get a good return and all that kind of stuff. So, which is awesome. I think
Hmm.
it's a great way to fuel the growth of the platform. But I think ultimately, long term, for the platform to really succeed, people need to post on it. People need to be active on it. People need to engage with the platform and understand who's engaging with them and kind of what's working and what's not. And so I think longer term, that's the kind of stuff I would really like to really focus on and really help people understand, who are the people who are following you, who are the people holding your coin that really love your content and really engage with your content, and what content is working and what content isn't working as well, which I think is still kind of a black hole at this point, and people don't really understand any of that stuff. So I think longer term, that's the kind of stuff I would really like to work on.
Love that. We were actually talking about this within our team as well, where one of my teammates, she was saying it's so hard with because
Right.
there's no analytics, right? So like when we post out content to track everything, like which did well, what kind of engagement, like like how if you think about Instagram or Twitter or whatever, they have like softwares where you can see what kind of engagement a post got, and and start thinking more about like, well, how can we put more content that resonates with people, and use data driven approach. And so we were thinking a lot about that as well. It's kind of one thing that we're seeing as well from content side. It's been hard to like really, uh, you know, as like fixate on which content is performing better than So if there's a way we can like kind of like look at the entire, different accounts and like which is getting more engagement and like why and
And
stuff
I
like that.
think
That'd
it's
be kind
also
of
going
cool.
to get a little bit harder too. That's the other thing to keep in mind is like right now we're using BigClout.com, right? Because that's the only platform that we
Mm,
have right now. As we get
right.
new nodes and people are
Yeah.
some people are going to be on BigClout.com, some people on some other node, some people on some other node, some are going to be using an app and you don't know which node you're connected to at all. So it's only going to get harder as we really get into that kind of real. I mean, I know everybody says we're a decentralized platform, which in theory we are right now, but we're not really in practice yet. And so once we get to it in practice, understanding that's going to become even harder, I think.
Makes sense. Are there any nodes that you're playing
Just
with
my
currently?
own.
Okay,
But
sure.
no,
Yeah.
because right now nobody's really extending the functionality yet. Everybody's just running the same
Yeah.
code right now, and so there's no really any need to be on kind of anybody else's node at this point. Once people start to really build out and really have new interfaces and kind of extend the functionality of nodes, I think that's going to get that will be really interesting at that point. But right now, people it's way too early yet.
Got it. Makes sense. Mubs, I want to end with two technical questions that I saw you posts, and I'm just trying to figure out if you should get the answers to this. So one was tonight's BitClout challenge. Can I verify the signed JWT tokens in PHP? Did you ever find that
So
out?
I'm still working on that. I got about halfway through.
Okay,
I mean, so what I'm doing right now in CloutPayWall, basically you can with the framework that I use, you can just call a JavaScript bit of code from the PHP. I'm basically when I get to that point, I'm just calling some JavaScript code to do the verification of the actual token. So I do know who's logged in and if they actually are who they say they are. I'm just not doing it in pure PHP yet. yet.
got it. Okay, and the last one was at the moment trying to avoid rate limits when calling the API, but hard to do when you don't know what the limits are. Would love to see some response headers with additional information or just more guidelines.
So
Did you
they
ever figure that
haven't
out?
because I don't believe that the rate limits are coming from the API itself. So the rate limits are being added by Cloudflare. I think they've just they've configured Cloudflare in front of the API, and that just I think has just put a hard limit on the number of API requests you're able to do in a 60-second block. So it's not anything that the BitClout team has added. They've just put it behind Cloudflare and just let them handle that to figure that kind of stuff out. So so I haven't been able to figure that out yet, just other than through trial and error and just slowing things down when I start to see kind of a lot more errors. And that was also one of the reasons I spun up my own code on my local machine, because now I can talk to that instead of the public API instead. And it's just still the same information. It's just on my own server, and I don't have any rate limit issues kind of on that one instead.
Jesus, Diamond Hands and Medium. Come on, give us that. It's like funny. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I thought it'd be cool to ask this, just because for other developers, and so I thought it'd be cool to ask you that and turn that into a video and put it out. So if any other developers kind of facing the same problem,
Yeah,
it'd be
like
kind of helpful. And I'll also ask my business partner too, a
yeah,
developer,
like you
just to
said,
do that.
that was my solution to ultimately was just like I just can run my own node because then I don't have any API issues on that. I can hit it as hard as I want to.
Amazing. It's the funniest part is having a business guy who doesn't understand hardcore tech asking tech questions. You're like, what the hell? It's like reading questions. I have no idea what you're talking about. But man, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was
Absolutely.
a
No,
lot
I'm
of
happy
fun.
to, and I'm really excited to see where this ends up in a few years, right? Like, I mean, we kind of all have our ideas about where things might head and kind of what this might look like. But I think the most exciting thing about this is that where this will end up in a few years, nobody really has any clue. And I think it's going to blow our minds in terms of where it actually ends up.
I agree. I think it's like like when you look back at it and you're like, whoa, like this is because it's so funny because if it goes big, we started from this from like right from the start kind of thing, so we'll be able to see the
Right.
entire journey. And yeah, we will just look back and we were like, what the hell were we thinking? You know what I mean? Or
Well,
this
yeah,
thing or
because
that thing or
even with things
uh,
like Twitter, I mean, like when I signed up for Twitter, it was still kind of SMS based and stuff. 140 character limits. There was no images. There was no hashtags. There wasn't any of that kind of stuff. And to think, where it's got to now with, 300 million people on the platform, and lots of apps and websites and things like that use it as well. I didn't think it was going to end up where it was. So it's going to be interesting with BitClout, and there's even more to BitClout, right? Like it's not just the social media platform. It's the whole social token standpoint. It's the buying other people's coins standpoint. It's the decentralized thing where anybody can run their own node and so that's the thing that those are things that we already understand, and I think if it just ticked off all of those boxes in terms of in kind of a few years, it's going to be an amazing platform. But the kind of things that we're going to be able to do on this thing that we haven't really thought about, I think is going to be the sort of the 15, 16 year olds who are out there who are already thinking about what this will be in a few years. They want to use it in ways that I don't understand, and so I think that to me is really kind of exciting thing, because they're not going to be limited the way that we were in terms of there's only so many things I could do on Twitter because there's only so many things that I was allowed to do because Twitter Corp
yep,
said, no, you can't do any of those things. Whereas here, I think,
yep.
all the 15, 16 years old who've got these crazy ideas about things that they want to be able to do, there isn't going to be anything that will stop them.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy to think about? Man, I was a fuck up when I was 15 or 16 years old. Like, how are they so good? Legit, man. I've chatted with like three or four of them. Like, talked to Hunter. I talked to who else? I talked to Shebang. Like, these guys are like
Yeah.
fucking good, man. Like, it's like 16, 17 years old. How are you so good? Like, good for them. I'm like excited for them,
Well,
but like, it scares me a little
not to
bit.
blow my own horn, but I started coding when I was 8.
All right, okay, Bobs. I was the only fuck up here. Okay, I gotta go now. This is no, but thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'm gonna end at that.
Thanks a lot.